Pickett, the senior pastor at First Presbyterian Church in Hastings, Nebraska. It feels to me like we are living in a world that is divided by opinions, differences, and political tension. How can we, as followers of Christ, respond? How can the timeless stories of the Bible guide us? How does our belief in Jesus Christ empower us to build a beloved community in an age of polarization? I want to invite you to join us for a 7-week journey in September and October as we explore these questions together. During a season when our nation is more divided than ever, let's come together to learn how to be builders of peace, unity, and love, to be builders of the beloved community. We hope you will join us in this opportunity to grow in your faith and become part of the solution in our polarized world. Throughout the next 7 weeks, we will study these themes during our Sunday mornings, and we will provide recordings of the sermons and the scriptures. We will also provide opportunities throughout the week to continue to reflect on these themes, including a Monday evening conversation group, a Tuesday noon Bible study, a Wednesday virtual book group, and 2 adult Sunday school classes. All are welcome to join us on this journey as we seek to build the beloved community in an age of polarization. We hope you can join us for these important reflections and conversations. All are welcome.
We'll read this morning passages from the book of Genesis. We start in the 37th chapter. The passage reads something like this. Now Israel, whose name used to be Jacob, loved Joseph more than the other of his children because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a long robe with sleeves. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him, and they could not speak peaceably to him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he delivered him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, throw him into this pit, here in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to their father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe with sleeves that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty, there was no water in it, and then they sat down to eat. And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels carrying gum, balm, and resin on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers agreed. When some Midianite traders passed by, they drew Joseph up, lifting him out of the pit, and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. We return to the story of Joseph and his brothers in the 50th chapter of the book of Genesis. Realizing that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers said, "What if Joseph still bears a grudge against us and pays us back in full for all the wrong that we have done to him?" So they approached Joseph, saying, "Your father gave this instruction before he died. Say to Joseph, 'I beg you, forgive the crime of your brothers and the wrong they did in harming you. Now, therefore, please forgive the crime of your servants of the God of your father.'" Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers also wept, fell down before him, and said, "We are here as your slaves." But Joseph said to them, Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? Even though you intended to do me harm, God intended it for good in order to preserve a numerous people, as he is doing today. So have no fear. I myself will provide for you and your little ones. In this way, he reassured them, speaking kindly to them. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This morning, we are spending time with the Joseph soap opera, as I like to call it, found in the book of Genesis. Spanning some 13 chapters, which, by the way, is only 3 fewer chapters than the entirety of the Gospel of Mark. It is an incredibly honest story. Within it, we find characters who play favorites, who engage in deception, who seem to have zero empathy for anyone around them. We find characters who are petty, jealous, fearful, and make choices that are absolutely devastating for those around them. We are also, this morning, continuing to explore how we might build a beloved community in an age of division and political polarization. Sometimes, I will admit, it is kind of tricky to find a parallel between our contemporary lives and these ancient stories that we have. Other times, well, I'll let you decide what kind of a day today is. But either way, you need to know and remember at the very start that ultimately, despite everything that takes place, these characters are also honest with one another. They are also humble, and they are forgiving, and they are ultimately kind to one another. Last Sunday, we spent time with Abram, and we recalled that God promised that Abram would have more children than there were stars. Well, Abram begat Isaac, and Isaac begat Jacob and Esau, and after his own long and winding road, Jacob's name became Israel, and Israel had 12 sons, the youngest of whom was Joseph, which is where we all say, "Aw, it's okay. Aw, little baby Joseph." And Joseph was his father's favorite. Nothing wrong with the baby of the family being the favorite, if you ask me. Now, Israel didn't really mind letting folks know that Joseph was the favorite. It wasn't one of those open secret kind of things. It was just open. Israel gave Joseph a coat with long sleeves, which would be beneficial if you were working outside all day in the sun. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than them, they hated him. And you know, maybe they could have figured out a way to get along with that. If it had stopped there, maybe they wouldn't have held it against Joseph, and maybe they could have figured out a way to grin and bear it and make it work and all sit down at the table together. But in the part of the story that we didn't read today, Joseph starts having dreams. And he also just goes ahead and lets everybody know about it. In the first dream, he and his brothers are out gathering sheaves of grain, and all of a sudden, Joseph's sheaf stands up taller than anyone else's, and all of the other sheaves gather around it and bow down to it. And his brothers, who already hate him even more, the text reads. But this time they hate him not because of their father, but because of Joseph's, quote, dreams and words. Then Joseph has another dream, and he tells it to his brothers as well, saying to them, "The sun and the moon and 11 stars," whatever that might mean, "were bowing down to me." And now, not only do his brothers hate him, but they are also jealous of him. Soon they will come up with their fateful plan to throw him into a pit. But I would argue that even without realizing it, it is they who are about to fall into a pit. The brothers have identified a problem. They have identified a problem in their lives, and that problem they've decided is Joseph. He's the reason for all of this. He's the reason they don't have coats of their own, at least not with long sleeves. He's the reason that their lives aren't turning out the way that they had hoped. He's the reason that the world is not as it could be or should be. And the 11 of them go off to Shechem. And they go off together, which is kind of important to the story. They go off to Shechem to watch over their father's flock. And as they go, you can almost see them stewing and churning and bubbling over. You can almost hear them muttering and cursing and stammering away under their breath. And it doesn't take much to imagine what may have happened along the way. Probably the idea starts out as a kind of a joke, as terrible ideas often do. One of the 11, maybe Judah or Asher, gets thirsty as they travel along. And he says to the rest, "You know, I wish we would have brought that good wine from home. I'm getting a little parched out here on this journey." "Yeah, it would be nice," responds Zebulun, "but you know that Dad would never let us take that. I mean, if we took that and brought it with us, then what would he and Joseph have to sip on at home while we're out here doing all the work?" "That's a good point," Asher might reply. "You know, they're probably sitting around right now, sipping on wine, but maybe we'll get lucky, and maybe he'll spill some of that fine wine on his precious coat." And at that, the group smiles at the thought of Joseph's misfortune. Well, even if he did, I'm sure that for dear, sweet Joseph, the clouds themselves would come down and wash his coat with nothing but the gentlest of rain until it was new again. Likely, yes, but maybe while the clouds are off washing his precious coat, the sun, which we all know so longs to be near to Joseph, will emerge and will burn his skin from head to toe. Well, if only we could be so lucky, to be honest. And then, maybe once he was burnt from head to toe, maybe then father would try to soothe his ailing son by reaching for the ointment only to be betrayed by his old and tired eyes and cover him with honey instead, which will attract flies and ants to beloved Joseph until he is covered in bites and irritating sores, and maybe those sores will force him to lie in bed until he is weak and withering and can do nothing for himself. And maybe then, that's when Father will see him for what he really is, weak and useless and nothing but an inconvenience. And then, maybe, if we're really lucky, the earth itself will open up, and since he is so weak, he won't be able to crawl out of the way until finally Joseph is swallowed up into the earth itself and he is gone forever. And on, you can see the brothers feeding into one another, getting more and more agitated, more and more worked up, saying to one another time and time again, yes, yes, that's what it is. That's how I see it too. Yes, yes, you're right. That is the problem. Yes, yes, that will fix everything. Yes, yes, we have to get rid of Joseph. Until they see him in the distance. This dreamer. And so angry are they, so filled with the rage of one another that one of them says, "I take it back. I don't wish we had that wine. I wish Joseph was gone. I wish Joseph was dead. Let's kill him." And somehow that seems like it's a good idea. Those who have been following along in the curriculum that we've been studying over the past few weeks will already be familiar, but there is a phenomenon in group dynamics, and it is known as the law of group polarization. Catching little title. And essentially it says this: the more that like-minded people hang out with one another, the more they push the group that they are a part of towards an extreme. It's a long ways from being jealous of your brother to wanting to kill him. And yet they get there. The question then is, how did they get there? They got there by only listening to one another. And the more and more that they talked among themselves, the more and more that they reinforced one another's worldview. The more and more that they convinced themselves of their own righteousness, the more and more their hearts shifted away from humility, away from the understanding that there is always a chance, no matter how small it may seem to me, that I am not looking at this quite right. And their hearts shifted further and further away from humility until at last they were incapable of seeing their brother as a human being. And somehow selling him into slavery seemed like a merciful compromise to what they had originally planned. They end up throwing their brother in a pit, but it is they who were in the pit the whole time. It's this pit of groupthink and self-righteousness and of not listening to anything other than themselves. Now, God is able, over time, to redeem this situation. Joseph is sold into Egypt and through a series of events becomes an advisor to Pharaoh, whom he counsels to prepare for a famine. And there is indeed a famine. And since Egypt has stored up food, people from all of the other nations begin coming to Egypt looking for assistance. And that is how Joseph's brothers end up back in front of him, seeking mercy in the form of food and forgiveness. And Joseph offers these things to them. And the brothers, all 12 of them, they have actually several sweet and tender moments where they express remorse and kindness and grace to one another. They are the sort of moments that can help you to hold on to the hope that such reunions are possible, that folks long siloed from one another may yet be able to sit down around a table, that wounds can heal. And the bonds that were broken, well, they can be restored. And the key to such things may very well be humility. As I reflect on this passage, I am obviously perhaps most struck by just how correct those 11 had convinced themselves that they were, and how dangerous such self-assurance can be. Through the prophet Amos, God called to the people and said, "Do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with me." It's kind of tough to walk anywhere if you're stuck in a pit or locked in a silo. To be humble means to recognize one's own limitation and to accept as fact that I could be wrong, and that there may be something that I'm missing, and that I may not understand everything. It is also the acknowledgement that God is the start of everything. Not me, not my family, not those with whom I agree. By humbly recognizing that we are not God, that we do not have all the answers, and that there may be wisdom beyond our own perspective, we can, at the very least, sidestep the demonizing and vitriol which is so common in our age of polarization. And we can continue to see one another as sisters, as brothers, as human beings who, on our best days, are all capable of great acts of grace and love and mercy and kindness. I am not sure that those brothers, the 11 and Joseph, I'm not sure that they could have worked it out. In that moment, if they all sat down together, I'm not sure if they could have figured out a way to truly be reconciled unto one another. Things for them may have been too heated. The emotions may have been too high. But if the 11 would have at least taken a pause from listening only to themselves, then I think that Joseph wouldn't have wound up in a pit. And I think that God could have found some other way of saving people from famine. And for any of us as well, It may not be time for us to sit down and try to work things out with the people who we consider to be our enemies. But even if we can't bring ourselves to that, even if it isn't safe for us to bring ourselves to that, it may be time for us to take a pause. To take a pause from listening to the same thing over and over again. To take a pause from reading the same stories time and time again. It may be time to take a pause and instead listen diligently and intently for the voice of God. And to listen for that voice of God so that we may be able to walk humbly with God and to walk humbly with one another once more. Amen.